everybody. Welcome to the June 5th, 2017 edition of the Rebels, Rogues, and Redbeards podcast, the Triple R Show, as the cool kids are calling it, a podcast about absolutely nothing, and yet somehow everything. We are back down to the three-man booth here again this evening. We can't seem to stick with that four-man booth thing we were trying to promote here so hard for so long. But joining me here this evening are two of our regular cast members. Across the table there is Mr. Anwar Perez. Anwar, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. Happy to be back.
Yes, sir. And also joining me here this evening is Andrew Silly. Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Good to be back here in the official Triple R Show podcast studio, whatever that may be. But just enjoying the opportunity to bring another episode to the community that we're developing here around this program. I want to take a moment to say thanks to those of you who have been consistent listeners to the podcast, and want to thank you for subscribing to us via whatever method of distribution you're listening to the show on, whether it be YouTube, Your Listen, or we're coming soon to iTunes. We're still working on that, but we do promise that we're going to get that sorted out here at some point in the very near future. But we appreciate you hanging out with us and joining us for this edition of the program. We're going to be mostly talking about the Extreme Rules pay-per-view here this evening, but before we get into that, I want to kick things off by kind of looking at something that's been an unfortunate downward trend as it relates to the Raw brand specifically. We're talking about the TV network ratings. If you're at all a fan of statistics when it relates to TV, you're familiar with how these things work. It's commonly referred to as a network share, which then gets translated out into a total number of viewers. If you look at the year-to-date, unfortunately, for WWE, the USA Network, and all involved, the May 29th episode of Raw was, I believe, the lowest of the year. It had a 1.75 share, which equates to, in the area of, it's a couple of million viewers, but still, in relation to everything else that's out there on TV, it's very low. And in relation to the things that they've done even this year, and certainly in the past, it's very low. People are concerned. People are wondering if this might not be a sign of things to come, potentially, and changes that might be rolling down the pipe. Some folks are saying, well, is this time for maybe a 2-hour Raw? Is 3 hours too much? Is the program just not able to compete with other sporting events and other events that are on TV? But just wanted to kind of open up the forum and get your guys' impression of what Raw has been like here recently for you as a viewer. Anwar, I'll toss it to you first. I know that you're a pretty regular viewer of the show there. What's been your take on Raw here recently?
It's a weird dichotomy. I think it's very interesting that with all these low view, there's a lot of good things and a lot of bad things that kind of go hand in hand. That's really, I think, and I hate to say this because maybe this is really an unpopular opinion. I think that the pendulum swung too much to the hardcore fan aspect presentation, that it's losing casual fans. And I know that may seem weird because it's a lot of the complaints or the issues that people would point out are mostly due to people of the WWE not listening to the fans. But I'd argue that they're listening to the fans. It's just they may just be doing it in the wrong way. Because for every time someone complains that, oh, they're just pushing Roman Reigns down our throat, yeah, but they're also doing things like what they did last night, doing a little with Samoa Joe. They've got Finn Balor in a prominent spot. They got Seth Rollins, and you've got Ambrose. You've got all these guys who, 5 years ago were the darlings of the independent scene or rising stars within whatever organization they were in, like a TNA, or they were established stars in Joe's case. And now they're the main focus, which is great because a lot of us are like, hell yeah, I want to see Samoa Joe in a main event match, or it's awesome to see that Finn Balor's not, the guy who was Bullet Club is now in WWE, is the main guy. It's cool. However, when they're having issues promoting those guys as being those kind of guys, like we know the allure and the stature they bring. However, the casual fans like, I just want to see this big dude beat that other guy up, and that's where I think a guy like, for some things that they get wrong, a guy like Braun Strowman's perfect. He's a guy that I think if you ask any fan of any they were like, you see this dude, he just looks awesome, and he, as a hardcore fan, you're like, man, yeah, I've seen him improve. I've seen him do all these things. And as a casual fan, you're like, this dude looks like a monster. Like, who would beat him? That's why Brock Lesnar is so, like, weirdly, he can be a heel, but he's just Brock Lesnar. He's going to come out and whoop somebody's ass. But the problem being is that he's not there every day. And so you got to make other guys feel like that Brock Lesnar, that special attraction. But the problem is WWE's like trying to showcase all this new young talent, and man, this guy's made a name for himself. Oh, he's a former world champ. It's great, but I'm getting more out of a guy that doesn't show up and defend his belt like Brock Lesnar, or a guy who hasn't even had a belt won in Braun Strowman, than I do a guy like Seth Rollins who's won the belt multiple times. But it's like, okay, that's great, but you haven't really done anything with him. After a while, that burns the hardcore fans, and then the casual fans are like, well, he was a bum to begin with anyway. I'm just saying, like, I think that's an issue. There's a lot of other things you can go through, but I think that's a big thing, is I think that pendulum swinging, and WWE is not sure how far to go with it.
And I'll agree with you, too, there on the point of Braun Strowman, because he is one of the few guys that has really come out of nowhere to be built up to the same caliber as someone like Brock Lesnar, for example. And the fact that, I always hate to see somebody get hurt in this industry, because as much as it is an industry built around physicality to where injuries are inevitable, you hate to see a guy get derailed in the middle of a big-time push like what Braun Strowman had going there. Of course, he's had surgery to, I believe it was a torn tricep muscle that he had here recently?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and he had to have surgery to repair it, and he's going to be back soon, but it was one of those things that could not have been more poorly timed in terms of when it happened, because he was riding so high off the whole ambulance gimmick there with him and Roman Reigns, to where, Reigns was just getting the dog snot beaten out of him on a weekly basis, and, it was doing great things. I will go ahead and say for both of them, because you had Reigns with this renewed interest applied to him, and Braun was obviously getting reactions from the crowd. It might not have been necessarily what they wanted in terms of him being perceived as this conqueror of Roman Reigns, the guy we didn't want to begin with, but at least it was some type of attention, and it was an example of somebody who has been a new star to be developed out of relatively nothing. He was in the Wyatt family, and if you look even back further than there, he was one of the Rosebuds, oddly enough, on a consistent basis with Adam Rose. But it's great to see him come out of nowhere. But I do agree with what you were saying there, as far as a little bit maybe too much too soon with some of these new faces. But before I get too much into that, I'll throw it to Andrew. Andrew, what's your take on Raw here recently been?
I think just the overall structure of the show is stale. It's been stale for a long time, but yes. I think they're really getting to the point where people are walking away because they know that it's going to be the exact same thing that they saw the week before with, a tag team main event, a 15 to 25 minute intro promo, and they don't have the urgency behind it, and it's not something that people necessarily need to see. I watch it religiously, but I've caught myself deciding to, do laundry or clean if I needed to, because I know if I step away for 45 minutes, I might miss a non-title tag match. I might miss a backstage promo. It's stuff that it's not changing, and it needs to pull people back in, because after the brand split, they changed up the entrance ramp and cosmetic things, but when storylines and characters and and everything else stays on a basically like a cruise control path, like you're gonna lose people, and they're gonna walk away.
Yeah, I'll totally agree with you there, because it's become very repetitive. It's become very much paint by number in terms of how they plug in not only the individual characters, but the segments themselves are very repetitive. It's, as you said, you can almost count on the first 15, 20 minutes of the show every week as being that talk segment where they're either going to set up something in relation to the program itself, or maybe the next couple of weeks leading into the next pay-per-view. But especially in a case like this, where we're coming off of a pay-per-view, it feels like they're sort of sitting on, and it might be too much to say they're sitting on the laurels, because I know after a pay-per-view like Extreme Rules, everybody's beat up, everybody's trying to come back off of, little dents and dings they got the night before. But that's part of the whole need to have more than just one group of stars, I believe. And it's frustrating because people like us know the level of talent that is on a brand like Raw, but unfortunately it just doesn't always get featured the way it necessarily should. And I think, too, a lot of times there's still too much talk on this show. There's too many backstage segments, and I'll even say too many commercials. I know that's a lot to complain about there in one series of comments, but it just, from the standpoint of a viewer, when you've got this on one hand and then maybe some other program that might not necessarily be available via digital distribution like Raw is within a couple of hours of the original broadcast, it's just one of those things where, all right, I'm going to choose to see something that is maybe live action in the term of sports or a game show, something like that, to where it's got my attention. And we haven't brought this up yet, but I think one big attributing factor to all of this is that this is the time of year when the NBA Finals are happening. The Stanley Cup Final is also happening right now. There's no collegiate sports at this point in the year, but still you've got two major sports that are really distracting in terms of pulling a lot of people away. But all that having been said, I think we're to a point where we can pretty well say that the pay-per-views are still, no matter what the weekly shows may do, the pay-per-views are still pretty consistent and pretty solid all the way around. At least they have been here in the recent history anyway. So we'll get into talking now, our first full-scale topic of the evening, and getting into the nuts and bolts of Extreme Rules. Of course, this was the pay-per-view that happened last night. I will admit to having not seen the entirety of the main event. Unfortunately, life as a dad, as I am, I have a 2-year-old, if you guys out there listening to us didn't quite know, who takes up a good bit of my time and also takes up a good bit of my energy. So when this show began to creep towards the 11 o'clock hour, I was sitting very comfortably in my recliner, and it suddenly became lights out. So I'm catching up on that as we speak, matter of fact. But in terms of the overall experience of the show, I will say that it was a fun show to watch. Nothing really dragged in this one, in my opinion, except for probably the one segment that people were expecting to drag, and that was because of what we had seen the week prior on Raw. And you probably already know where I'm going with this, but the Bayley versus Alexa Bliss match for the Raw Women's title was just, it was a squash match, for lack of a better way of putting it. There was nothing really to it, and it was disappointing to me because I thought they had some real chances to further both of those young women in developing more of a feud, developing certainly Bayley as a legitimate contender still, and also Alexa as a bona fide champion who, in this case, had a sense of ferocity to her that we hadn't seen on display previously. But, Andrew, I'll toss it back to you. What were your overall thoughts on the show there?
I think it was a strong pay-per-view. The cruiserweight title match definitely stood out to me. They gave those guys the time that they needed. And Surprisingly, the main event is something that I was really looking forward to, but it didn't go as smoothly as I had expected. All of the guys still impressed me. The finish was a bit of a surprise. I figured they would go with someone who had already wrestled Lesnar before, like a Rollins or a Reigns. But it's going to be interesting to see how they treat Samoa Joe compared to his days in TNA, because realistically, he was the Brock Lesnar of TNA for a little while. So it's going to be a really good match, and I'm glad they took the opportunity to have the number one contenders match at this pay-per-view. They usually have that as a throwaway match for, one of the main events of Raw, and it doesn't hold any importance. And putting it on a pay-per-view, having it be the main event, for me personally, it made me look forward to it. It got me excited to actually see who would be facing Lesnar.
Yep. And I'll say this too, there's a lot of moving parts in a match like that. Having 5 guys involved in any scenario, Extreme Rules or no, it's pretty tough to pull off. And it's one of those things where creatively you have to look at how you can put together scenarios and segments within that match that not only create a cohesive narrative, but also that don't sort of lag behind or create those lull moments to where you wind up losing a crowd. But looking at other matches on the card there, you mentioned the Cruiserweight Championship match. Aries and Neville have had a tremendous feud. Really have enjoyed the stuff that they've done. Probably my favorite match on the card, though, was the first match on the card. Other than the pre-show, I don't even think we need to bother talking about the pre-show. But the Intercontinental Championship match between Miz and Dean Ambrose, where if Ambrose was disqualified, he would lose the championship. It had so many qualities of just old school booking to where the match just looked like something out of 1985 NWA Jim Crockett style stuff. It just felt like a good, I shouldn't say like a Dusty Rhodes booked match, but it definitely felt like it had something that was culled from that era to it, because not only was the stipulation something that you don't commonly see, but just the way those two guys put the match together. And the finish, I thought, was very well done, with the whole thing about Miz trying to get disqualified by having Maurice slap him. Just very well done overall. Anwar, I'll toss it to you now. What were some of your highlights and lowlights maybe from the program overall here?
Overall, I thought it was pretty good. I mean, there's a lot of different ups and downs. I think you hit on the head earlier about the women's match. It's just not. This wasn't good. I mean, it wasn't against the talent, but then at the same time, I don't know. You know what I mean? It's
there was nothing substantive there. It just
there was nothing. There was just nothing there other than you hurt yourself. I mean, you made Bayley look even worse than she's been portrayed lately. Just wasn't a fan of how everything went. But I think there were great pieces. The main event was awesome. I think with all the things going on with again, it was a 5-way, so it makes it even more awkward than a 4-way. You know what I mean? At least that one was like, okay, what do you do with 5 people in a match? There's not like one-on-one scenario. But I thought it worked well. I thought everyone hit their moves. I mean, it was kind of like everyone kick out everybody's move at the end. But I think you could argue that made sense because of the stakes. It's like, hey, whoever wins is fighting for the belt. Whether that's you want to be the guy that wants to fight Brock Lesnar, hey, whatever. But you're fighting for the championship. And I think it's one of those instances that it's okay if they kick out of everything, because it's like, that it gives that idea of like that last will and testament, like I'm going to come out of this, I'm going to win. So I thought that was good. Joe winning the whole thing was great. I'm a big Joe fan from when I got back in wrestling in like 2006. So I've been a fan of his almost a little over 10 years, and I tell you, it's good to see him in the spot that he's in. But everyone shined in the match. I think keeping Roman away from the belt is almost a good thing as well too, because again, they've got all the time in the world, I think. So to get these pieces to where they really can maximize their efforts of what they've been trying to do with Roman Reigns, they still can do what they need to do to make him where he is their guy. It's just when they can do that and how is going to be a different story. But I thought overall it was real good. The tag match, the steel cage match, was pretty good. It was okay. It was amazing to see the Hardys still do what they can do at their age and what they've been doing it as long. I mean, you've got to think we're 16 years removed from the second TLC match at WrestleMania, which is the one everybody remembers.
It's amazing they can still walk.
So the fact that Jeff is like, all right, I'll just do this whisper in the wind or off the top of the cage, like no biggie. Hey man, kudos to him. So it was an okay pay-per-view again with all the gimmicks for me as a fan of the old school ECW and just the growing up as a kid. You're always like, oh, there's rules to this match or there's no rules to the match. Things like that was always neat. So I thought it was a solid B.
Well, you brought up one other thing that I'll hit on before we move on to my next point. The tag team match there. I catch a little bit of flack for this just because of the fact that not a lot of people like the guy. At least they don't seem to whenever I bring this up anyway. I've forever been a fan of Sheamus, and the fact that he and Cesaro, who's another one of my favorites, are in a tag team together and doing well for themselves is just, it tickles me to no end to see the two of those guys come out there as a unit and now be on top of the entire tag division in the respect to the Raw brand anyway. But the Hardys, it's still amazing to see them. I think some people are upset that it's not the full scale, transition into them being the broken Hardys, but at the same time, it's going to come. They'll get back around to that at some point. But in going full circle here, Anwar, you mentioned the concept of this being a pay-per-view that's sort of centered around gimmick matches and stipulations. But the name of the show is Extreme Rules. Does this show, at least this iteration of it, live up to the name of Extreme Rules?
I'd say the main event did, and I'd say probably the steel cage match. I mean, the kendo shots in the women's match was okay. I thought it was a little awkward with the whole submission match. I mean, I guess that's, I don't know. I feel like they should have just, in the DQ match, stip in the Miz Ambrose match, I felt like it should have been, I don't know, I'm pretty much, there wasn't even an Extreme Rules match. Like, there was no match under Extreme Rules. It was just a 5-way. So, which is no DQ regardless, but it's not an Extreme Rules. So, I get it, but it would have been cool to have been, I thought it would have been cool if the main event was like, hey, guess what, we're going, I almost, what I was picturing in the main event was, and maybe Joseph, I think if Joseph was here, he would be able to correct me, but I think I'm right. 2000 Armageddon Hell in a Cell. With Rikishi, Rock, Angle, H, Taker, and Austin, where it was just balls out craziness. I was kind of thinking that for last night. Not to say that I was hoping for that. I didn't get it, but it's still a good match. But I was kind of thinking there's only one way they got it. With this many people, they just got to go balls out. And I thought that's what they were going to do. But I guess they'll save the balls out for like the next pay-per-view, Great Balls of Fire. But there was no Extreme Rules match, and I thought that was kind of silly.
It still boggles my mind that in 2017, WWE has a pay-per-view named Great Friggin' Balls of Fire. But we'll address that here in the coming weeks, of course. But Andrew,
I want you guys to know that the best part of this pay-per-view, in my opinion, though, was that they finally put Nia Jax where she belongs on the pre-show. And it was behind a table, which is definitely where she belongs. She does not belong in a ring. She does not belong in any sort of title picture. And the satisfaction that I felt with seeing her sit behind that table it can't be put into words.
Jeez.
If you haven't caught on by now, ladies and gentlemen, Nia Jax, not exactly the most favorite member of the roster of at least one member of our cast here, but I think
I hope she wins all the belts. I hope like that she's
she's going to be the first unified women's champion.
Oh, I mean like
WWE.
all the belts.
No. They'll probably put the Universal title on her because, I mean, she's got to be hiding something somewhere. Because,
well, I'm glad somebody said it. That's not me. So,
yeah, she's hiding something somewhere. She's half the man, The Rock.
Oh, jeez.
Oh man, and it's. I think it's inevitable. So Andrew, you're gonna probably have to at least deal with one. I won't say it'll be a main event match, but it'll be a main event in the women's division anyway. Whenever she eventually becomes the next person in line for Alexa Bliss to challenge there, or to be challenged by Alexa Bliss. No, that's wrong too. To challenge Alexa Bliss for the WWE Raw Women's Championship there. But as we're recording this, it's on a Monday night, and I'm looking over my shoulder at the fact that Alexa is being confronted by Mickie James and Dana Brooke. So, maybe it might be another month or two off there to where you don't necessarily have to have a Nia Jax match there. But we'll have to wait and see what happens there.
I'd even be okay with a Dana Brooke title run as long as Nia Jax.
I'd be okay with that too,
that's
but for different reasons. Just saying.
Hey, that's Dolph Ziggler's woman, okay?
Is it really?
That's what I've read. They were at the Hall of Fame together. They've been seen together. So
he has an odd taste.
He does.
Yeah, he likes the thicker but firmer women.
Well, I don't know. That's not. Well, you know who he's the famous person he dated. I can say famous person, but I mean like she was famous. Yeah, Amy Schumer. I mean like. Not knocking that at all, but I mean, I'm just saying, like,
yeah, she's
that's not the prototype. That's definitely not Dana Brooke. Not to say she probably couldn't get that way, but just different strokes for different folks. I mean, whatever.
He's getting older. He might have to settle.
Well, it's one of those things where he can always potentially look to NXT for up and coming talent. If you want to go that far, to maybe say, hey,
he can pull a Paige, and Xavier Woods.
Well,
I was gonna go.
He has options. So.
Well, now that this segment has been totally derailed by talk of who Dolph Ziggler may or may not be betting, let's go ahead and.
Asuka needs to hold that women's title, the new one, close. That's all I'm saying.
Because the old one has been ruined. We know that much for sure.
Yep.
But we'll go ahead and wrap up our first segment here. Appreciate you guys tuning in with us once again here on the Triple R podcast. Rebels, Rogues, and Redbeards. We're talking Extreme Rules, and we will be back in just a few moments.
But I'll take you through. You fire a musket, but I'll run you through. So when you're waiting for the next attack, you better stand, there's no turning back. The bugle sounds as the charge begins. We battlefield, no one wins. The smell of action smoking holds his breath. Hands are plunging to certain death. Oh, 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 oh. It's so near, yet so far away. We won't live to fight another day.
Welcome back, everybody. Appreciate you joining us here once again on the Triple R podcast. Rebels, Rogues, and Redbeards join this evening as part of the three-man booth with Andrew and Anwar. We're talking about the Extreme Rules pay-per-view, and we're going to continue the discussion here by talking a little bit about what we had opened the show with in relation to Extreme Rules and the future of at least the Raw brand anyway. We talked at first about how the Raw ratings have been on a slide here recently. You can attribute that to potentially more interest on the part of a common wrestling fan in the other sporting events that are on TV this time of year. Got the NBA Finals, NHL Finals, other stuff going on. A lot of people are home from school now as well in terms of that beloved 18 to 25 demographic. Might just not be wanting to sit at home and watch TV. It's a nice summer. Plenty of opportunities to go out and hang out with your buddies any night of the week. But the bottom line is that ratings have been somewhat through the floor, we'll go ahead and say, for Raw here for the past couple of weeks. You would expect leading into a pay-per-view that it would have come up a little bit, especially one like Extreme Rules, where there's a lot of stipulations, a lot of interest from the gimmick matches that were part of the card. But at least it didn't seem as though it was blowing up any kind of wind up the skirts of the audience out there, because according to the most recent ratings figures, the Raw audience is leaving, and they're leaving in droves. So we wanted to take a look at that in relation to what we saw last night with the pay-per-view, and talk a little bit about what the potential is for them in the future, and also say, all right, did Extreme Rules fix anything that was wrong with Raw, or is this more or less still the same thing that we had before? Because after Extreme Rules, the fact that we have not had a champion, more or less, on Raw since WrestleMania, it would seem to be forcibly fixed in saying, okay, well, now we've got a number one contender, and he's going to have a match at some point in time with Brock Lesnar. So, Anwar, I'll toss it to you first here, sir. Did Extreme Rules, in your opinion, fix anything that's been wrong with Raw?
Yes, somewhat. It at least gave direction to the main title of, again, Lesnar hadn't been there since Mania, really, and they're really leaning, it's weird, they're really leaning on not having a champion. I mean, you could say, well, they've got the, Intercontinental belt. Yeah, but, I mean, it's, as well as The Miz and Ambrose have been working in this feud, it's not the one that's been lighting everything. It's not the belt. They haven't done a lot to make it the belt. Now, granted that they can, I thought Miz did a phenomenal job when he was on SmackDown, making that the belt. Like he came close to at least giving it a lot of legitimacy as opposed to what had been beat prior. So I give him credit for that. It's just when you're on the Raw brand, it just doesn't. It's like there's been no belt, so there's no. Why is everybody fighting? Oh, I don't like the guy. Okay, cool. There's a little bit of that, and that's fine. Storylines you kind of have to mesh all of it, but there's no top prize, and if you don't have any top prize to fight for, then why are you having these guys fight for no reason if they're not even fighting for a belt? Like, at least make it interesting. So now they're like, okay, we're going to bring Brock back. Well, that's going to fix a lot of it because now you know Samoa Joe's is basically going to be on a tear, and I really do think that he's going to. I'm interested in this match because I feel like they may make this match with Joe a very competitive one way or the other. Now, I hope it's not just like your squash, but I would hope that it's just literally like just two big dudes beating the crap out of each other, similar to the Roman Reigns Lesnar matches, which I'm a fan of. I was a fan of.
Yeah, I think this is a big opportunity for them to let both of these guys do what they can do. I think that you stand a chance for this to be something, a lot of people have, at least in this country, maybe either heard of this match or they have only seen maybe parts of it or saw it a long time ago. But Lesnar has had matches with, for example, Shinsuke Nakamura in the past. And I think that if they ever wanted to do something along those lines to where you had that really just hard fighting, strong style type of contest between two guys, these are the two who obviously can pull it off better than a majority of the roster. And I think that would be cool to see, especially in this scenario, because you've got obviously a heel versus heel type of dynamic going here. But I don't know that necessarily matters in terms of, people would say, oh, you've got two villains going toe-to-toe here. How does that work out in terms of whatever story they might be trying to tell? I don't think that matters necessarily, because what's going to be on display here, hopefully going forward, is the just pure brutality and ferocity that these two men are capable of putting out there. So I think, as you were saying, the fact that Lesnar or someone in the future is going to be present on Raw as the champion will definitely bring some renewed interest, because, as you were saying, it's one thing to have a belt like the Intercontinental title on Raw, but you still need that belt that is the pinnacle of a given brand to say, okay, this is the reason why these guys are coming out here and beating the tar out of one another, because they want the notoriety, they want the fame, they want the money, whatever else that comes with that title. And this is an unrelated thing, but this is something I've preached before when people have asked me for my input when it comes to indies and indie wrestling as a whole. I forever have said, please do not disrespect your fan base by bringing out some replica title that you slap your logo onto and pretend that this is our belt. People know what those belts look like, okay? You're not going to bring out a big gold and put your logo on it and people not say, oh, well, that was that belt that Ric Flair carried around for however many years, wasn't it? No, it's our belt. You're full of you-know-what. But that's an offshoot. That's a different topic for a different time period there. I do believe, like you were saying, though, that it's going to do good things for the creative aspect of the show moving forward, to have the champion back and to have that belt be present on a consistent basis. But overall, beyond that, I don't know that anything else really gets fixed as a result of Extreme Rules. I think that maybe you could say that the Intercontinental title is in a better position now because of the fact that you have The Miz carrying that belt. It still blows my mind to think back of the point in time when we were first introduced to Mike Mizanin as this douchey guy who was a part of the Real World cast, who's now this wrestler who just is as captivating as could be. It's just proof
I do need to say, though, like, them putting the title back on The Miz, the only way that's going to be seen as a positive is if they have someone new feud with him.
You think so?
Yeah, the Ambrose feud has, it's carried over from SmackDown. It's been going on for a while. And maybe it's just a personal opinion. I don't know what you guys think, but Ambrose doesn't do anything for the IC title.
I will agree with you. I think that it's time to do something different with Ambrose, period. And whether or not that's him feuding with someone else, or maybe him taking that character in potentially an edgier direction to where it's more Shield Ambrose and less whatever Ambrose you want to call him here now.
What if you had him be what if you really went all out with the whole Shield thing, since they've kind of been teasing, and I mean that, they've been going with Rollins versus Reigns here and there, it was like, oh, the two former Shield friends. Well, what if you just, and they're both baby faces, why don't you just have Ambrose just beat the crap out of both of them and be like, kind of play the whole Raven aspect of like, what about me? I'm the guy that, whatever the reason to be, that would be, you could have that, and that would be a good feud to have for the next few months.
It would be.
Keep all three guys busy. People would be interested because, like, oh my God, the Shield's fight. It's been 3 years since the Shield broke up, which is longer than they were together.
That's I will say, when Ambrose was in the title picture for that short time, that's one of the pay-per-views that I vividly remember, like when they teased him. Was it the three of them match with the Shield where all three of them ended up holding the title in one night? I think that was one of the pay-per-views last year.
Money in the Bank, I believe.
Yeah, and that, like, maybe it was because it was going to be his first title reign, but it felt so important. Like, it felt important him being in that title picture. And when maybe it's the IC title, maybe it's him, but it's been beaten over the head for far too long. Now, the Miz can carry that title, but he needs fresh challengers for it.
I believe.
Who would that be for you?
Honestly, they're kind of throwing him by the wayside already, but I'd like to see them take somebody like Elias Sampson and give him an actual chance. Like, it seems like they're already starting to give him the Tyler Breeze Fandango treatment of like, hey, we know you can wrestle, we know you have a personality, but we're just gonna leave you in the corner and basically have you be beaten by every champion we have. He has all of the heat in the world, so it might not work against the Miz right now, but someone fresh, someone new. I don't think there's anybody in NXT that they could pull up, but some of these guys that they've overlooked.
What about they just put Balor?
That's another opportunity there as well.
I'd argue, and I think all three of us are pretty well aware of how New Japan does their IC belt, or basically how that's treated over there. Is if Raw could get the IC belt to what New Japan's done for when guys like Okada aren't defending it as often, or you got Naito was basically, that was his belt after Nakamura left, one way or the other. You know what I mean? Nakamura left, and Naito was the one that really carried the ball with that belt. I mean, it's just, and then you had Elgin for a while, but that belt was a secondary belt. Again, Nakamura really did it, and of course the first IC. Do you guys know who the first IC title holder was? Ironically,
no.
For the New Japan one, it was part. It's funny how it's everything's full circle, but it was part of New Japan's first foray into the U.S. and how they wanted to, kind of come over here, and it was back in 2011, and they couldn't really get anything to happen for them. 2011, 2012. Which is crazy to think now that New Japan couldn't get themselves over here in the U.S. with the talent they had. But basically, they did a tournament in Philly, in the old I believe the old ECW arena. But basically, the tournament was won by MVP.
Really?
He was the first IC title belt holder for New Japan.
Wow. Because
it was part of the idea of, he was a guy that they all liked and respected because he was even though he comes from the WWE, he was a guy that literally was like, I'm a huge Japanese wrestling fan. This is my thing. they gave him the opportunity, and it was an American wrestler kind of give that, hey, we have American wrestlers too. You know what I mean? It was their way to get their foot in the door, but he was the first champ. And, I mean, that belt went from person to person, and when they finally got to Nakamura, they realized, aha, this is the guy that can carry this belt. And I would argue that The Miz is the same way. Miz is the guy that could be that Nakamura, so to speak, to where he's able to make this belt as entertaining and meaningful. However, to Andrew's point, you need somebody new that he can challenge, not the same thing. Oh, wow, Dean Ambrose. Didn't they feud last year? Didn't they trade the belt last year? That's cool. But this isn't, Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon, or it could be freshened up. There's way more talent there. They need to do something. I think Finn Balor would be a good choice, and you could go ahead.
I mean, this is probably a very unpopular opinion, but put that title on Reigns, because if you're gonna have him, or not even the title, put him in that picture, because I know they want him to hold every title eventually, 15 times and break every record. So, The Miz would be a great guy, and you know what? That might even get people to cheer Reigns more than normal.
Yep.
Like could they put a number of people with him, but Dean Ambrose is the guy that needs to be doing something else.
Yeah, I think that's probably other than the women's division, which I think is probably very much salvageable on Raw. It's just they got kind of to a point where it was really, creatively speaking, a bad choice in terms of the direction they took Bayley and Alexa. I think there was a lot more that the two of them could have done, but it's now gotten off the rails. So the two of them, I would be surprised if we see them paired up here at all in the near future. So I think the women's division will be fine. I think the biggest thing, as you were talking about here, to be fixed on Raw is to renew attention in the main event level feuds there. I think the tag team division will be fine because you've got the Hardys. It's one of the hottest things going in all of wrestling, even if they're not broken. Them and the Bar, I think they're calling themselves, Sheamus and Cesaro, can have plenty of great matches. And then, kind of waiting in the wings is Anderson and Gallows, who've not necessarily been taken advantage of, I'll say, in their run thus far in WWE, even though they've had, a little bit of a title shot and a title run there off and on. It's something that they could still, I think, benefit more from their involvement and incorporation in some of the storylines and the feuds they've got going on out there right now. Of course, the Revival will be coming back whenever Dash Wilder gets back from his broken jaw. So I think there's a lot of things to look forward to on Raw in the coming future. But is this still a show that people are going to want to tune into? Is there enough there to bring somebody back who's been watching, the NBA Finals or whatever else here consistently on Monday nights? Not only as the summer carries on here, but of course, as the summer fades into fall, you have to wonder, all right, well, if they pick them back up at some point during the summer, do they then plummet even further down when Monday Night Football comes back? Because if you don't carry it, I think, strong into August, something is going to break at that point in time to where they say, okay, we've got to do something, we've got to do it now, because otherwise, whenever we have to, I'm not sure when the contracts are going to come up again, but whenever they have to renegotiate these big deals with NBC Universal or whoever they're with at that point in time, they're not going to be able to go to them and say, hey, look at these ratings figures that we drew in for you guys. This is something you can take your potential advertisers and say, hey, we're going to make you some money. And that's what it's all about ultimately. So we'll have to wait and see whether or not anything does get fixed with Raw. I'll be eagerly awaiting the ratings figures whenever they come out next day or two here to see if Extreme Rules did give them a bump up whatsoever. But all that having been said, we're going to take our second break of the evening, and we'll be back here in a few moments for the much-awaited return of the Mixed Martial Anwar segment. Stay tuned, folks. Be back here shortly. you're interested in a getaway to Central Florida but don't know where to start, you should contact Magical Wishes Travel with the Truesdales to help you plan a truly unforgettable vacation. Magical Wishes Travel with the Truesdales can handle booking all aspects of your trip, from hotel rooms to theme park tickets and stroller rentals to dining reservations. Magical Wishes Travel with the Truesdales can take the stress out of planning your next vacation. Contact them today via their Facebook page, www.facebook.com/MWT-Truesdales. That's facebook.com/MWT-Truesdales. Welcome back, everybody. Appreciate you tuning in and being a part of the Triple R podcast. Rebels, Rogues, and Redbeards, want to thank you once again for tuning in and being a part of the community that we're establishing around this little show here. Thank you for your likes, comments, and subscribes on whatever media platform it is you're getting this content through, whether it be YouTube, Your Listen, or coming soon in the near future, iTunes even. Appreciate you guys tuning in and being a part of the show. I want to kick it over now to the one and only Anwar Perez, as he's going to bring back the much beloved Mixed Martial Anwar segment, as he's got a very interesting story to talk to us about, something that definitely has a opportunity to tie into, I'll say, the carny nature of professional wrestling and how it ties into, or how it relates to, I should say, dealings that they're having with some of the talent on the UFC roster. So, Anwar, take it away, sir.
I appreciate it. It's good to have some interesting MMA talk to actually talk about.
Yes.
The unfortunate thing is, it's a sad state of affairs. I say sad state of affairs, but it's kind of, the writing's been on the wall for a few years, and it's been a lot of discussion lately. If it's not talking about the fighters themselves, it's been just as much about the treatment of the UFC and MMA fighters as a whole from the UFC. And you can go back to many different aspects of when this may have kind of started rumbling, from the days of when a guy like Randy Couture sued the UFC. That was a big deal at the time back in 2008, 2009. And then you've got guys like Conor McGregor calling them out on their practices last year, when they basically said you can't fight at UFC 200 because you missed a press conference, you're off the card. Yet, a few months later, Ronda Rousey doesn't do any press, and it's okay for her not to do any press for her last fight that she did. So things like that, it gets very, it's just a little shady. And so what's come out of it recently is that UFC fighter Demetrious Johnson, he is the UFC flyweight champion, and arguably the pound-for-pound number one fighter in the world, basically came out against the UFC saying that they're bullying him, and then their unfair tactics of trying to get him to fight a guy that he doesn't want to fight, which sounds ridiculous at first because it's a fight game. You're going to fight whoever it's a business. I pay you to fight this guy. You fight, but it's a different story when I say you fight this guy. No, I don't want to fight him. Okay, well I'll fight him now. Okay, well, we changed our mind. We want you to fight this guy now. Okay, no, that doesn't work. So basically, they told him that they needed him to fight Ray Borg for next title fight, and it would have been the next title fight for Demetrious Johnson. If he wins, will break the record of the most consecutive title defenses that was set by Anderson Silva. That's a huge deal because that's basically saying, this guy has literally not lost he hasn't lost in over 5 years. Getting there at least. So that's a huge deal in the mixed martial arts world. The guy hasn't had many significant injuries. He will be going down as one of the greats. He's saying basically the UFC said fight this Ray Borg guy. Okay, I don't want to fight him. No, you should fight him. He's the next contender. Okay, I'll fight him. And then another title fight got canceled between Cody Garbrandt and TJ Dillashaw for bantamweight, and basically Garbrandt got hurt, so Dana White told Demetrious Johnson, "Hey, I want you to fight TJ Dillashaw." Why? I don't want to fight him. He's not going to make the weight. No. But it's good for TJ because it'll be a good fight for him. Plus, it'll be a good draw. Well, first you're telling me that I don't draw because you've never promoted me as such, and then at the same time you're also telling me that I can't pick a fighter, but you want me to pick a guy just so your guy can get a favor from me, basically. And then they deny it, and then Dana White does the Dana White thing of actually promoting the fight. It's like, oh, it's been signed, this is going to happen. And Demetrious Johnson, like, I never signed anything. So there's just been this whole big back and forth thing, and it's really come to light. He did a statement. You can go online and look it up. And it's really crazy the amount of stuff that he's calling the UFC out for and the kind of things that he's been talking about. And it's pretty shocking to see how things have turned around for the UFC. Now,
not to
go ahead.
Cut you off there, but one of the things that, we talked about this in our production meeting, but I wanted to bring this up here in reading his statement. And I'm not the biggest MMA fan in the world, so it was something that I had to kind of... I'll go and say I had to ask you for clarification on this, but in that statement he talks about pay-per-view points, and I wasn't real sure on what that meant, but it made perfect sense after you explained it to me in relation to these guys getting more money for their performance based on the buy rate of the pay-per-view, and it translates down to, you could say, not necessarily their popularity, but the ability of their division, title, whatever else, to bring in buyers and viewers. And the whole thing about as part of, I'm trying to remember the website that it was attributed to. I think it was what was the site that it was on? It was, I think, MMAfighting.com.
MMAfighting.com. Yep.
They had the entire write-up there. It's tremendously interesting to read, but the talk of them basically saying, okay, and I say them, we're talking about Dana White and some of the upper echelon guys from the world of UFC saying, okay, well, you're not going to get any pay-per-view points, period.
Yeah.
Which is like saying, okay, well, you don't have the ability to then earn a living or to get anywhere close to what somebody like, the upper tier, like heavyweights might. And that just boggled my mind at the whole concept of that.
But it's all started from back when Reebok came in and said we want to be the number one sponsor for the UFC. But so what that turned into is like these fight kits instead of uniforms. That's why if you ever watch MMA in the past, you're like they used to be almost like NASCAR's vehicles with like all the different sponsors on their shorts or tights. Well, that's because at that time they were allowed to have sponsors and you had to pay a certain fee to be a sponsor for the UFC, but some people would do it. Demetrious Johnson's biggest sponsor was Xbox, was Microsoft, and they had that Xbox logo right on his trunks, dead center. It was on his backside, and that was his bread and butter. I mean, arguably he could probably made his show up money from that payout. But once Reebok came in, do it now.
I was just saying, certainly, I agree with you wholeheartedly there.
Oh, yeah. And once Reebok came in and then said, oh, well, you only get paid X amount of dollars for how long you've been in the UFC, and then that's your sponsorship money or it's ridiculous. It's nothing compared to what these guys have to make. And so you have fighters who are literally, in some cases, still working jobs. There's one fighter, and I can't remember off the top of my head, one guy or female fighter is literally is still working their day job to make ends meet.
And I think that's the biggest issue for me is that it would be one thing if these guys were, office workers or whatever else to where they sign a contract and it says, all right, well, this is what you're going to do, 9 to 5, whatever else, this is your job. But to come in and say, okay, this is your maximum earnings potential, but we want you to go out there and potentially die for us to make money off of you. Because these guys, they're just like wrestlers. They put their lives on the line when they go out and have a fight. Because you get hit in the right area, if you have some type of pre-existing injury, maybe nobody saw or diagnosed or whatnot, you could conceivably get killed in one of these fights. And to say
it's insane. But you also got to think the injuries, at the end of the day, it used to be, and here's where the culture shift has become. It used to be where the UFC would be like, hey, back in the 05, 06, and even before then, but you got guys like Chuck Liddell, Matt Hughes, Randy Couture, GSP. They were coming up when MMA wasn't, a thing. It wasn't like, it was just the UFC, that's it, and whatever regionals you had. Well, at the time, if they needed someone to have a fight, like, oh man, our main guy got knocked out, is hurt. We need a fight stat. We need somebody to step in. A lot of these guys would step in and say, you know what, I'll take this fight. I'll do a solid. And then the UFC would reciprocate back. The biggest example of that is Chuck Liddell. Chuck Liddell could have literally, and no pun intended, could have been put on ice for almost a year because Tito Ortiz ducked him, and then did other things to not do a title fight for the light heavyweight belt. Well, Chuck literally was like, hey, you guys need to fight for this card. I'll fight for this guy. I'll fight this guy. And Dana was like, you really don't have to. I don't want you to get hurt so you lose your opportunity or lose your opportunity to fight. He's like, no, don't worry about it. I want to fight. It's my job. I want to fight. And Dana would take care of them and pay this and take care of that however they need to. Nowadays, you don't have guys willing to do that because the UFC hasn't earned that trust. I mean, guys at the UFC or even built the UFC, they've been sued by, like John McCarthy, Big John McCarthy is a ref. He was one of the guys who helped with the rules and judging of the first few UFC events before, as well as becoming a ref. However, he ended up leaving the UFC because the way Dana treats people and the way that the company's done things. And a lot of times, this is a big piece here. The Fertittas, when they owned, used to basically be the butler for Dana. So basically, when Daddy got mad, they just go to like Grandma and Grandpa, the Fertittas, basically say, "All right, you know what? We'll take care of it. Don't worry, it'll be all right. We'll smooth things over with your dad." And they did. They were the reasonable ones. Well, now it's basically Dana's just kind of this figurehead, and they got this group of different people with these new owners, and there's no one really on the fighter side, unfortunately. And the argument has been made that Demetrious Johnson has been featured and promoted because, they even said in the statement that Dana said, I would if you don't take this fight, I'll just shut the division down, which is an asinine thing to say. But the crazy thing is that basically you have Demetrious Johnson you have Demetrious Johnson he was promoted on the Ultimate Fighter. So some people are like, oh yeah, well, he's on the Ultimate Fighter. He was a main coach on that. Well, yeah, but no one watches the Ultimate Fighter anymore. I think people stopped watching like 10 seasons in. Seriously, like nobody watches that. So you're basically trying to say you're doing the least minimal thing. You're like, it's not like you're saying, hey, we put Demetrious Johnson on ESPN and he's doing the media rounds like Max Holloway did for his recent fight against Jose Aldo. Like he was everywhere. Yet here comes Demetrious Johnson, who's going to be like basically considered the greatest MMA fighter of all time, not named Fedor Emelianenko, but he's going to literally be just like, okay, we'll give you tough. Nobody watches that. Nobody. It's like when they tell you, like, hey, you know what? We'll give you a slot. I want to do TV. All right, we'll give you a slot. What time? 1 o'clock in the morning. But no one watches that time. Yeah, but it's a TV. It's prime time. You're on ABC. It's just asinine to see and I wonder if more fighters will come out. Again, this is not this big defining story like, oh my God, it's shocking. Not in the MMA world, unfortunately. But it's one of those things, like you said, the Carney thing. How many times have you heard stories of Vince McMahon saying, hey, I need some help? Or, hey, if you do this a favor, I will be more than happy to, reciprocate. I know that you've had stuff with Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and even Hogan, you know what I mean?
Well, that's where the parallel lies there in terms of looking at this from an MMA perspective across the board to professional wrestling, is that you've not only got a situation where the talent are somewhat limited in terms of their ability to speak out about some of these things, because let's go ahead and face facts. There's opportunities for people to make money in both industries, no matter if you're in WWE or if you're on the independent scene, working, as you said, regionals and whatnot in mixed martial arts. But when it comes to the top of the line groups or promotions that you can be with, it's realistically either UFC or WWE. So for a guy to come out and make these statements along the lines of what DJ has, it shows his, I'll say, just resiliency in making those comments, because he's carrying enough clout now in his career to where he can say these comments and it won't really have any I think, detrimental effect on him, because what can they do realistically? But flipping the coin there to wrestling, somebody makes public statements along these lines about Vince or whatnot, and they'd be gone, or at least put in the doghouse for 6-8 months, and their existence made so pathetic that they just want to leave the company. You'd have an Alberto Del Rio or a Jack Swagger type situation where they just say, all right, I want out. I'll go, wrestle in Mexico or somewhere and make still good money, but not as much money as I could have. So, Andrew, I don't want to leave you out of the conversation here with this segment, but I don't know how big of a fan of MMA you are, but in looking at this type of thing, what's your impression of where this whole thing is going for, talent relations as it applies to guys being able to earn a living not only in MMA but also in pro wrestling?
I mean, this might not be necessarily answering your question, but I think Dana White is starting to act like Vince did.
Yes.
In the the mid 2000s. Like,
yes.
It's becoming all about the money, all about what he wants. Like Anwar pointing out that when he didn't want the match, Dana White threatened to shut down that division.
Yeah.
That to me screams Vince McMahon.
It does.
That's like the crybaby syndrome of, I imagine it almost happened the same exact way when the cruiserweights disappeared. Vince is probably like, oh, you guys don't, you're not happy with the first and second segment of Raw? Well, you're not going to get anything now. You're all released. And, I mean, like you said, Anwar, I haven't watched The Ultimate Fighter in God knows how long. So the fact that they're using things like that, which is basically the equivalent to main event,
exactly.
It's just not. It's not a feasible way to run your business, because now it seems like he's pandering to the McGregors and the Rouseys, like all the people that are
do draw.
Yeah, they're guaranteed to pay the mortgage on his next house.
Which is sad. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's to me it's not the way you run a business, and it just shows that long term it's just going to get worse. Because I mean, I can't remember his name right now, but one of my friends back home in Connecticut, she's actually dating a guy who's in Bellator, and all he talks about, and I don't know him well at all, but all he talks about is how great the company treats him.
They're that's the thing. And a lot of big name fighters who, once their contracts come up for UFC, they're going to Bellator. And it used to be a thing because they allow the sponsorships, plus they're taken care of a little bit more. And there's arguments on both sides, but by and large, I mean, when you've got contenders like Rory McDonald, who I'd argue is in the prime of his career, of his fighting career, going to Bellator instead of signing with the UFC, that says something, because that shows that it's not just guys who don't have an opportunity or can't cut it in the UFC anymore. It's guys that are literally he's basically the times he's lost have been for championship fights, or I mean, you know what I mean? Like it's insane to think that that's the way it is. And what's crazy to wrap this up is the sad thing is not just, and Robert, you made a good point, but the fighters, they're living their wages. This is what I do. Here's the thing: like a lot of these fighters now have to resort to basically trying to be a Ronda Rousey, like Andrew said, or Conor McGregor, and that's the thing. They're trying to be these people, but they're not. So it comes across as fake. Like it comes across as more fake than when you see a bad characterization in wrestling. You know what I mean? It really just comes across as like this guy's not even like trying, or it's so fake but they have to literally be these asinine, loud people to be like, oh, look at me, I'm the baddest man in the planet. I want the best fighter. I'll whoop his butt. All this stuff, to talk all this trash, and I'm like, you suck. Like, that's not you. Like, it's just, you're putting people in positions of like, I'm going to make my money however I can. So if it means being the loudest person in the room, that's great. Conor McGregor does both. That's what makes Conor McGregor. Ronda Rousey is just the way she is, and that's what made her that way. So, yeah, I mean,
my friend, I just remembered his name, but my friend is dating Brennan Ward, who's in Bellator, and I think he's a welterweight, and he kind of has that McGregor attitude from what I've seen from him. Like, he'll run his mouth a little bit, but he's had probably somewhere between like 5 to 8 knockouts, if not more. And sadly, that's what needs to be done, but you need to find the balance. And what I've seen from him, which hasn't been a whole lot, but I've seen a good amount, he backs it up. He'll throw a verbal punch, but then he's going to follow it up with, he's going to be the aggressor in the fight. And I think that's what a lot of the guys, when you're not getting the pay-per-view money, when you're not getting the big money, I'm not saying these guys aren't training, but
it's hard for them to pay to get to train.
Yeah. Do you want to truly give it your all when you're going to be shortchanged? You're not going to be able to have the sponsors on your trunks and stuff like that. Like, I imagine most of these guys are training 6-7 days a week.
Yep. And that's one of the things, and to wrap this segment up, in trying to force these guys to become caricatures of what a true fighter should be, that being a pure athlete, you have, in my opinion, the real danger of diluting UFC to where it becomes, I'll go ahead and say, sort of a laughing stock almost in a lot of respects, because you have the hardcore MMA crowd who's going to respect people who are fighters, and they want to watch UFC because of the fact that it's fighting. They don't want to watch professional wrestling. And the line is, every once in a while, pretty blurred between one and the other because of some of the tactics of someone like Dana White, not only in terms of how they promote things, but also in terms of how they handle talent. So I think they've got to tread this slippery slope that they're on here. I don't think they're in any danger of going away. This is not us saying that UFC is going to fold here at some point in 6, 8, 12 months. But at the same time, there's going to be a point in time to where you've got other competitive promotions out there who can pay these guys, who can treat them better. And at that point in time, you're going to have a choice here again. We've talked a lot about ratings in this episode. You're going to have people who say, all right, well, I'd sooner watch a Bellator fight as opposed to a UFC fight, because I know that this guy over here is, being able to fight his fight. And I think people follow, to making their comparison to the independent scene in professional wrestling, I think people follow professional wrestlers in particular who have the opportunity this day and age, especially to pursue things as they want to, for lack of a better way of putting it. You need to look no further than the Young Bucks to see exactly what I'm talking about there. And I think there's going to be plenty of Young Bucks in the MMA world, not only presently but in the future as well, who continue to take advantage of opportunities with companies like Bellator and others who will allow them to earn top dollar, as they should be able to. Because, as we said before, when you're out there willingly getting your skull bashed in for the sake of someone else making $1 off of you, you ought to be able to pull in money whatever way you can. I think we can all three agree on that. But to wrap up this segment, I want to say thanks again to Mixed Martial Anwar for bringing a good dose of MMA content to the program here this week. We're going to take our final break for this particular episode of the Triple R podcast and be back in just a moment with our unpopular opinions. Stay tuned.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Are you looking for custom T-shirts with a quick turnaround? Then look no further than SOS Custom Tees, your source for custom T-shirts, vinyl decals, tumblers, and more. Contact them today via their website, www.soscustomtees.com, and be sure to check out all the designs that are available in their online store. All right, welcome back, everybody. Appreciate you hanging out with us here once again on the Triple R Podcast, Rebels, Rogues, and Redbeards. If you have not already, please consider go ahead and subscribing to our various channels. That way you'll be the first to know whenever we've posted something new in terms of either a new segment of this show or some other piece of content. You never know. We might try some new things with some of our media experiments that we've got out there. But regardless, we want you to make sure that you're able to know whenever we're bringing something new out, and subscribing is definitely the best way of doing that. So if you consider clicking on that button there, we definitely appreciate it. Comments, likes, whole 9 yards, always appreciate it. But to wrap up this show, we want to do our normal unpopular opinions segment. And, here recently, we've had a number of good movies coming out. We talked here recently about the sequel to Guardians of the Galaxy, that being Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. We all enjoyed that one. I think we've got another couple of movies coming out this summer that we're all looking forward to seeing. Had an opportunity to check out Wonder Woman. My unpopular opinion, as contrasted with what most everybody else seems to have said, is that is a mediocre movie at best. I did not think that highly of Wonder Woman. Not because it's a woman, not because it's a DC movie, just didn't do really anything for me. I think they could have done a lot of better things with the story in terms of introducing her at a different point in history that wouldn't have required you to sort of say, okay, well, what did she do for 80 years between World War I and when Superman suddenly shows up on Earth? It's just one of those things where you spend the majority of the movie questioning little stuff like that, or at least someone like me does anyway. Now that's out there and in the open. Andrew, how about you, sir?
This is probably just an unpopular opinion with adults. Children would probably agree with me, but I'm starting to miss John Cena quite a bit.
Ooh.
I know he's only been gone for like 2 months, and sometimes I reflect back on how nauseating his proposal was and seeing that live in person at WrestleMania, but when he's away for these, 2, 3, 4 month periods, you really start to notice how good he is at promos and how he can carry a feud. And it's starting to get to that point for me. I know most people would be totally fine if him and Roman Reigns just weren't a part of WWE anymore. But, since we know he'll be wrestling until he's about 80, I have to admit I'm starting to miss him a little bit. So I will probably never listen back to this part of the podcast because I don't want to ever hear myself admit that again. But it's what I'm feeling in the moment right now.
You're probably not the only one, because there's probably another big segment, I'll say, of the wrestling population who were saying, man, you know what? That Cena guy wasn't that bad after all. Anwar, how about you, sir?
I like that. That's kind of hard to top. But I do enjoy it. But I'll agree with Andrew on that one. There's a huge difference when especially the last couple of years. Let's be real. He's been awesome. His matches have been really good, and it's been a fresh change of pace in what he was in 08, 09, where it was just like, all right, now it's getting really stale. So I'm with Andrew on that. I guess my unpopular opinion is something we've gone on, and it's back to movies, and we've talked about this back and forth, and I saw something again recently about it because people don't understand it. But man, I tell you what, you can't get me to out of the house to see a movie unless it's in IMAX 3D. Now, a lot of people are like, I don't like 3D for various reasons. It doesn't do anything for them, or it makes them sick or whatever. for me, I like to see a movie and make it as big and bombastic as possible. When I used to drink, it was cool to be in the theater where it was like a nice little cocktail table and you watch a movie and when you're a little reclining chair. That's cool, but I also realized that like it's really just the atmosphere, and I could get that at home now that I own my own house, And so, if I'm going to movies, and especially as a father, basically a lot of the movies my wife and I go to watch, or I go to watch, or whoever. It's my son's usually. I need to figure out how to deal with my son as far as getting somebody to watch him. So if I'm going to go see a movie, I want to go all out. I don't want it to just be so. IMAX 3D for me works because it's just loud as hell, and it looks visually. I think it looks a lot better. Even though people could say, "Oh, well, it's just the glasses don't do anything as far as the 3D." Maybe I saw Wonder Woman in IMAX 3D, and I could arguably tell you that I can't tell you one single segment that was in 3D. Now, I'm not saying there wasn't, but I couldn't. It wasn't something like and I wish Joseph was here to say this, but it wasn't like something like an Avatar or even Transformers where you knew that that's a 3D segment. You know what I mean? Or other than that, it was just kind of just there for the IMAX aspect, but it looked great and it visually looked awesome. So. A lot of people bag on IMAX 3D, but for me, it's the way to go for movies just because it's over the top, loud, and just visually great. And I love all kinds of movies. It's nothing to do against any of a movie that's not a big action movie or whatever, but I can watch those movies at home when my son goes to bed. I don't have to worry about somebody trying to arrange a time for him to, somebody to watch him and stay with him. Or arrange time to go out with my wife and watch this movie, or like, I got to fit it in this schedule. I can just wait till he comes home. He's asleep in bed out on Tuesday night without having to worry about if I have a babysitter. So for me, if I'm going to go all out, I want to make it worth my while.
Yeah, I can agree with you wholeheartedly. You and I have a lot of similarities in terms of our home life and say, okay, we have children, wife, whole 9 yards there. I think for my wife and I, especially, you could say a very similar statement is true for us in that if it's a movie worth going to see, it's got to be something that we're willing to cut that chunk of our life. I shouldn't say cut it out, but we're willing to do something to where we're willing to rearrange a whole bunch of stuff to spend 2 hours in a dark room and hopefully be comfortable and to take a little bit of a left-hand turn off your comment there. We recently, for the first time, enjoyed we actually saw Guardians of the Galaxy at I think it was a Regal Cinema up in Sand Hills area in South Carolina that has what they refer to as the RPX cinema experience, which the chairs are more plush, the screen has a nice curvature to it, so you get a little bit more of a depth of field, similar to what you get with an IMAX, but not the full-scale IMAX experience. And I'll say that I don't know that it was worth $18 a ticket, but at the same time, I feel like if we go to a movie, that's the kind of thing that we would definitely pop for, because here again, it's an experience. It should be something that you enjoy, and it should be something more than what you can get at home. So that's the whole take on that there. Definitely agree with you as far as the IMAX stuff, though, is concerned. If it's a movie that's shot with IMAX cameras and intended for IMAX, there's nothing else like it in terms of how it's put out there on the screen. So, but that will do it for our most recent episode of the Triple R podcast. Talked a lot about some different things here on the show. Definitely had a good time with this one. I want to say thank you to my two good brothers here, Andrew and Anwar, for joining us. Joseph, we hate you couldn't be here, but we'll definitely look forward to catching up with you on a future edition of Triple R, where we can hopefully have the four-man booth in one place at one point in time. And also, just as a little tidbit, this is a moment where we'll pull back the curtain. I think this may be the first episode we've recorded where we haven't had some type of technical snafu. So I want to just give our entire crew kudos for that there. So all that having been said, Appreciate you guys tuning in once again. This has been fun. We will catch you guys soon, and we'll see you down the road.